Right. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar with our partner, cpq.se. Today's webinar, the missing link that kills your order quality. CPQ expert Patrik and Magnus will talk about how to leverage existing product data through integrating CPQ with PLM, ERP, and PIM. Today we have 45 minutes around, and as I mentioned, our CPQ expert will talk about what is important when connecting CPQ with PLM, ERP, and PIM. But before I give the floor to our speakers, our experts, quickly, who doesn't know about Tacton? I will mention briefly what Tacton is. We're enabling smart commerce for manufacturers, meaning that we helping complex manufacturers increasing sales efficiency by placing the customer at the center of their buying journey. And quickly, some of the numbers. We're co-headquartered Stockholm and Chicago, but we have also offices in Karlsruhe, Warsaw, and Tokyo, with 225 around co-workers with $35 million annual revenue and more than 50,000 users globally using our CPQ solution. And we are honored to recognize the Gartner's Magic Quadrants a couple years in a row, and 2 years in a row now we are in Visionary Quadrant. As you can see, that Gartner recognized Tacton CPQ is the best suited for heavy manufacturers with complex products and visualization requirements. And with that complex or heavy manufacturers here, you able to see some of the logos, some of our customers in heavy manufacturing, and we have more than 20 years of experience in a vast range of fields working with industry leaders to make the very best of their businesses. And as I mentioned, our two experts, our two speakers here will be Magnus and Patrik, and I'm leaving the floor to you guys, Patrik and Magnus.
Thank you, Atakan, for that very nice introduction. Did I share the right screen now? That's always the question. Yes, I did.
Looks very good, Patrik.
Thank you. So this webinar is about how to use master data from other systems in Tacton CPQ. And we call this the missing link, because if we don't use data from other systems, we're out of sync. And when we're out of sync, this causes order errors. And so, Magnus, what is the missing link that kills order quality?
I think, truth be told, I don't think there is one missing link. There are actually several. But let's start with a few here, just as an introduction. I think the first problem is that some people, maybe I don't say management, but maybe I do say management, think that this is already working, because there are so many people really trying to solve this, and it seems to be solved maybe. But everybody else sees that there are actually some glitches. There is not a perfect information flow from product management and product development to sales, and also vice versa. So this is what this webinar is going to be about. We're going to talk about what we can do with information in other systems, and by that leverage the CPQ system and get a much better situation for everybody involved. Because we know that this is a solvable problem, even though there are some pitfalls. And so we have done this several times. We now have 4 ongoing projects where we take information from various systems, and we'll get to that. Everything from medical devices to heavy equipment. So beware, you're not alone with this problem that you want to solve. Many are already doing this in the market. And as they say in the movies, that this is based on a true story. So what we're going to talk about today, me and Patrik, are some examples taken from our daily lives when delivering these kind of projects. And then at the end, we'll just wrap it up with a small mini demo.
And so, Magnus, what problems are we actually talking about? And whose problem is this really?
I would think that it's typically the people listening in on a seminar like this. And I would guess engineers working in manufacturing, working in the logistics, working with sales support, might even work with sales. And the thing with this is that the people causing the problem is not actually the people suffering from the problem. So this might not be a problem for sales, but it's rather a problem with sales, right?
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into it, and let's look at our example. We're going to use one piece of product in every example, and we've selected it to be a beacon that we might mount on the roof of a light truck. We think everyone understands what a light truck is. We think everyone understands what a beacon is. So we think it's a good example. And we're going to use that beacon and see how that causes issues when we transfer information between different systems, between sales and so on. And we're going to start off with a small example of a problem flow, a typical example of how the problem could occur in an organization. So let's meet.
And this is the flow that will lead to errors, right, Patrik?
Exactly. In this example, we have Sam. Sam works in supply chain or in relation to ERP. And there's a beacon manufacturer that they use that has quality issues. And so he wants to remove the beacon temporarily from the product offering. And he could easily make the change in his ERP system or in his supply chain system, but he has no way of communicating this information further up. And so when you have no standard way of communicating, you know what happens. You send an email. And so he sends an email to Jennifer that works at engineering. And Jennifer reads the email. And again, I mean, she has no formal way of sending this information forward through the organization. So, I mean, the best she can do is write another email or make a note in her PLM system. And that note in the PLM system is an organized way of doing it. But again, the information doesn't flow automatically forward. And then we have Tom. He works in sales support. So he's the guy that puts together the CPQ system. Typically, Tom needs to communicate via email, via Excel sheets to Sam at supply chain and ERP, to Jennifer at engineering, new items are developed and so on. And then he puts all this information into the CPQ system. And again, I mean, a note in the PLM system is not something that he's going to find very easily. So he makes no note of these quality issues with the beacons. And then we have Nora. She works in sales. And she has this huge deal ongoing. She's going to sell 200 trucks. It's like her biggest deal ever. And she creates a quote to the CPQ system. It looks very beautiful. She sends it to the customer. She gets it signed. I mean, she's super happy. She's stoked. And she automatically presses the order button in CPQ. And the information is being sent back to Sam. And he sees, ooh, we just sold trucks with 200 beacons ordered. And Magnus, whose fault is this? Can you blame anyone here?
I would say that it's everybody's fault. And the problem goes two ways. So everyone working with the product needs to keep sales informed, and everyone working in sales needs to keep the rest of the company informed with what they hear and what they learn. But today in this webinar, we're going to focus one direction, how we can help Sam, Jennifer, and Tom to get a better system. Because currently, they're like playing this old game, broken telephone. It's very fun when you're at a kid's party. It's not so fun when it goes into your daily routine at work. So the problem that we want to solve is the broken telephone problem. Right, Patrik?
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, we just want to point out here that we're kind of one directional in this webinar. You already touched upon this, but we're going from back office, from ERP, supply chain, PLM, forward to the sales here. And it's information that is not automatically transferred from back office to sales today. But there's an equal important direction going backwards. So there's a lot of information that sales knows about that needs to be flow back to engineering, to ERP. I mean, they have the knowledge about how the market works. And we think this is a completely additional webinar. And so if you're working in sales and you think you have really good information that you need to communicate to the back office, essentially we're saying, your day will come. We will make another webinar about that. But that's not the focus of this webinar. So Magnus, with that said, with your 20 years experience of CPQ, where should you start when you start thinking about integrating CPQ with other systems and other information?
Right. Yeah. I think some things are quite obvious, of course, and a very low risk. So, like prices, for example. Of course, you should have the right prices in your CPQ system. Otherwise, it's just a waste of money if you don't. So that's an easy thing and a good example. But another thing that often comes up in the early stages of almost every project is that wouldn't it be great if we could have warehouse availability in CPQ? But there is a problem with that, isn't it?
Yeah, there are many problems with this. I mean, the first problem with warehouse availability or delivery times in general is that data is traditionally, I don't want to bash ERP, but it's medium or low quality. So you don't actually know if the data you feed into the CPQ system is correct. And on top of that, the current delivery times or the current warehouse status is not really that relevant if you're sending out a quote that you don't know if the customer is going to sign, next week or in 2 weeks or when they're going to sign. You want to be able to quote your full product portfolio at that time. So, I mean, sorry, now I went 2 slides ahead. But with that said, I mean, this is not really a good thing to do, because it's like driving your car and the current warehouse status is like looking in the rear view mirrors while you're driving forward. You need to be looking forward instead of what's going to happen in a few weeks when it's actually time to deliver this item you're selling. Magnus, do you see any other issues?
Yeah, there are, of course, because CPQ and the logic that we defined in CPQ, there's a lot of information that goes into CPQ, and it's quite sensitive with the consequences, and that's the good thing with the CPQ solution, that it sees the consequences, all consequences of your choices. And this means that if we take the example here with Sam's beacon, say that we remove this beacon and say that there is a country, I don't say France, but say that there is a country and they require that there should be a beacon on every construction truck that we sell. So what happens then? If we remove Sam's beacon, that means that we can no longer sell construction trucks in France. And it's a big risk that we need to be able to mitigate. Right, Patrik?
Yeah, I mean, and so let's talk a little bit about risk then. We spoke about prices. Prices is a low risk, kind of high reward here, because if we get the correct prices into CPQ, we will price things correctly and we will never be out of sync with the latest price list. And if that price information resides somewhere else, like in ERP, it's easy to take it in. It's just a number connected to some sort of SKU or article number. So that's like an obvious thing to do. But then on the other, so more riskier end of things, we could have the country of availability. And country of availability is one of those things where you block things, right? So you're saying this beacon is not available in this country. And that causes very easily these domino effects, where if you remove the beacon, then you cannot sell construction trucks, then you cannot sell this and that, and you're essentially stopping sales from selling. I mean, there's a high risk of introducing these things into the CPQ system. But at the same time, if you look at it from the other perspective, what would happen, for example, in a medtech company, if you sell a non-approved item? That's actually an even higher risk. So what we're saying is that you should not, stay away from the high risk integrations, but obviously you need to do those with much more care, and also think about maybe mitigating that risk somehow. And we're going to get back to that in a few slides.
Yes.
So go ahead, Magnus.
Yeah, let's go ahead with the presentation. Let's move to the next slide, because I think it's time to draw a little bit of a map here to see what systems do we have. There are quite a few systems, and you have a lot of experience with these kind of systems, Patrik. So why don't you give us a handful of some nice three-letter abbreviations?
Yes, we all love a three-letter abbreviation because they tell the whole world, right? In this slide here, we've tried to draw up a typical map of how a organization may look like. And to not get too confused by all these three-letter abbreviations, we're actually going to bring our friends in again. And so we have Sam. He works in delivery. So he works in supply chain systems. He works in ERP systems. He makes sure whatever is sold is actually bought, so the pieces for it, and actually delivered in the end, or at his organization, I should say. On the left-hand side, we have Jennifer. Jennifer works in engineering, so her department makes sure that new products are developed, that they are engineered, and that they can, be sold. You can say. I mean, if they can be made. And then at the top, we have Nora. She typically works in a CRM system where she manages her contacts. And then she works in a CPQ system to be able to sell her manufactured products. And for those manufactured products to be possible to be sold in that system, someone needs to feed that system with information. And that's our friend Tom here in the middle. He talks to, he gets Excel sheet from both Sam and Jennifer to build his CPQ system. And most commonly in very many organizations, he's an Excel magician, right? He's extracting information in Excel sheets, making magic to it, and then feeds the CPQ system. And then on the right-hand side, we typically have installed base. So what's already sold needs to be serviced and needs to be kept track of. And so with that sort of background of what systems we have, let's talk a little bit about them. So, I mean, all these systems are great expert systems for their specific purpose. But CPQ is the only system that can overview the complex relations between the modules, the relations between the products, and what could happen, for example, if we remove the beacon. It's the only system that has the complete overview.
Yeah, but does that mean that we need to bring all this information into the CPQ system from the ERP and the PLM?
I mean, if you're a PLM-centric company and you actually have controls over all the modules, module variants, and maybe the technical rules in the PLM system, it might be a good idea to extract this information into the CPQ system automatically. And the same might actually be true for the ERP. Very many companies are ERP-centric, and they have all this information in the ERP system, and you can drive the CPQ based on that. But if you believe you can just mirror these systems into CPQ and be all done, then I think you're doomed to fail. What's your experience with this, Magnus?
Yeah, I think this is something that we keep coming back to in almost every workshop that we run, that let's focus on what's important for sales. So the nitty details can live in the ERP, it can live in the PLM. But some information really makes sense to keep in sync between the system and can make a huge leverage for the CPQ system. So why don't we move on to the next slide, and you can show us some example how we, from the same structure, can extract the various types of informations.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about 3 examples of extracting information from other systems into the CPQ system. But to be able to do that, we're going to show you a very simple product structure here. So we have something to talk about. And we come back to our fantastic beacon here. We call it a module beacon. And the beacon could be different module variants. I mean, you could have a small beacon or a large beacon and so on. In our organization here, we only have the module variant beacon, and we have the option of not having a beacon, so module variant no beacon. This is typically what's called the E-BOM or engineering BOM. This is as far as the engineering BOM usually goes. And then on the next level, we have all the bits and pieces that go together into our module variant. So that could be the glass of the beacon, it could be the bolts, it could be the LED lights inside. I mean, essential information to build this, not always essential information when you sell this item. But we're just going to turn that around a little bit with our first example, because in certain organizations, and this is our first example, you may be one big part of your business model may be service contracts. And when you sell service contracts, you need to sell replacement items for the bits and pieces of the product. And for a beacon or a truck manufacturer, that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you're in the biopharmaceutical business, you maybe see that the spare parts is essential part of your business model, and thereby you need to have these bits and pieces on your quote out to the system. And so in one of the examples that we're working on right now, we're extracting these bits and pieces from the PLM system, so they're stored in the CPQ system, so that when you're doing your quote, you can automatically create a service part contract. So with all the bits and pieces that goes into the service part contract. Essential for this business, maybe not essential for another business. Let's take example number 2. So we spoke about this country of availability in a previous example. Typical, very important requirement in the medtech industry. You need to ensure that each module variant is approved to be sold in each specific market. So you may have a list of approved module variants or articles for specific countries, typically in an ERP system. And you want to extract those from the ERP system and drive the configurator so that if you're selling to Norway, you only sell allowed beacons for the Norwegian market, approved by whoever approves them, some sort of legal department, right? This is one of those examples typically where we can have a lot of domino effects. We remove one thing and suddenly that means that we're not able to sell this, which means we can't sell this, and suddenly half our product offering is gone. Very high risk, but on the other hand, even high risk if you by accident actually sell something not approved to a market. Let's take a third and final example. So you may have your technical rules describing the relations in your PLM system. So I think this is the example most people think of, that they have already written all the technical rules in the PLM system. Let's fetch them into Tacton. And this is an example we also do sometimes, where, for example, the relation between the beacons and the aero package, which is on top of the truck in the same position, they compete for the same space. You define these rules in PLM. You don't want to define them once again in the CPQ system. You want to keep them in sync automatically. I think these are 3 good examples, but it also points out very different needs for very different organizations. What do you say, Magnus?
Yeah, so the first example here is just to keep data in sync. The second example is to block things that are not allowed for a certain market. And then the third example is, and this is a topic that we could spend hours discussing, the reuse of existing rules. It's sometimes a good thing, because if it's important to keep the systems in sync, let's go ahead and do it. If you want to have long-term maintainability, we have solutions for that as well. But that's not for this day to discuss this today. So yeah, let's move on and talk a little bit about automation, because automation is always a risk. And that's why we always ask in the very beginning of a project like this, so what's the upside of having correct data here? And also, what are the risks that we see? Because we want to be proactive, we want to be able to mitigate these risks. So maybe with this example that we've been talking about, the beacon here, maybe the best idea is not to block the beacon. Maybe it's to use more than one tool that we have in our CPQ toolbox. Maybe the first thing would be to prioritize, to see that, okay, but let's stop selling beacons by default. So set a lower priority for the beacon, and only add the beacon when there is no other solution available. And then, of course, there are other ways of controlling how sales work. That's really the power here of a CPQ system, where we can actually, with clicks of a few buttons, steer a whole organization in the way that we want it to go. So, for example, say that we increase the price for the beacon. Then some will continue to buy this beacon, maybe give us enough margin so that we can source it elsewhere, and others will avoid it. And that's also one way to solve Sam's problem. So there is not one thing that we do to solve the problem. There could actually be a whole range of ideas that ends up being the final solution here.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke earlier about the idea to mark things that are risky to sell as a what we call an ETO flag, so engineer to order flag, meaning that you can always sell it, but suddenly it requires an additional approval before the quote goes out. And essentially ensuring that you can sell those construction trucks in France, but before the quotes go out, before every quote goes out, there's a person in engineering that needs to look at it just to ensure that we can actually deliver this one. So you add those flags to things that are risky temporarily, and then remove it again and let the CPQ system run smoothly when the issues with beacons have disappeared again. If we look at this slide then, so what should you start with? Should you start with stuff that increases quality, or stuff that makes you increase efficiency in your organization?
Yeah, so this is very easy in my book. So it's always quality. Because if we suffer with quality with our CPQ system, that is a thing that can actually sunset a system. We always need to focus on quality. We can always save time later. And time saving is also an important factor here when it comes to integrating master data, but quality always wins. And then let's move on. We have been talking about these risks. Are there other ways to mitigate?
I think the obvious answer that everybody's going to say is to test as much as possible. And I think testing is an essential in project when you start integrating things. But there's also other aspects of this, right?
Yeah, sure. And so in practice, we need to be prepared that things will not work when we integrate, because we already talked about the risks. We must make, from the very start, by design, make it possible to debug. So when we move information from one system to another, we cannot have a black box. I've tried this, it doesn't work, because you really need to be able to debug the data transfer to see, okay, what information is sent from this system to that system, because there are unknowns, and they will typically appear at the worst time. And then you need an efficient way to work with this. So what's your take, Patrik?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen in projects that we run together is actually that we automate things, but the human mind is actually kind of amazing here. It's really good at finding patterns. It's really good at spotting changes. So we always recommend having an intermediate format, and we actually recommend it being Excel, because you can use a combination of the human mind, finding patterns and spot changes, but you can also use the classical tools that we're used to, right, Magnus?
Yeah, because we don't want to we don't want to need to go to a developer in order to see what's not working in our systems. We should be able to address this ourselves, because it would typically, if I was Sam, it would typically be me that changed something that broke something, and I want to quickly understand. And then I want my tools, I want my Tacton Studio and be able to test run it there. I want my Excel tools that I usually use. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it may sound kind of rudimentary to use Excel as an intermediate format, but Excel, modern Excel, is an XML, so it gives you a way of transforming external data into an intermediate format. You can look at it as a human, but you can also look at it as a computer, and you can debug what's happening in between. But it's also important to keep in mind that it's kind of impossible to automatically test all combinations. If you look at a typical product configurator, I mean, you end up in billions and billions of combinations, and that will take eternity of time to test. So it's really good to go back to as close as possible to the initial source and try to understand what works and what doesn't work and why before you push it forward.
Yeah, and this is the way that we have always debugged Tacton models in the past. So even if we're integrating data from other sources, we still need these tools in order to get the job done. So now to our 2-minute mini click dummy demo here. So we're going to show a quick example of, just to illustrate what we have, just to sum up what we have discussed here. So first thing, normal behavior in Tacton CPQ here at Beacon Trucks. We always include the beacon, of course, and we see that there is a price. It's a little bit less than 400 euros. So now when Sam has this problem, there is going to be a little piece of information flowing from his system based on an integration that we did that says, okay, down prioritize this SKU. So we're not blocking here. We're just saying set a very low priority for this specific SKU. And now when that goes into the CPQ system, okay, it normally flows into a ticket and it's released so that we have all the functionality for testing that we normally have in Tacton CPQ. And now when this new version is released, we see that the beacon light is no longer selected by default, thereby putting less pressure on supply chain to have this available. Okay, so we move on, because maybe it's just not one thing that we should do. Maybe we should also do something about the price, because we said it might be a good idea to use more than one tool to fix a problem. So in this case, we increase the price by almost 50%, a little bit more than 50%. And that will also help us reduce the volumes that Sam needs to source. But we see here that it's still possible for Nora to sell the beacon light when required, but at a higher price point. Okay, so I guess that was one of the shortest demos I've done in many years. So
yeah, but every webinar must have a demo. So now we've got that covered at least.
Yes.
So with a project like this, I mean, you should be expecting high fives when you deliver this project, but you should also expect this is kind of a steep hill to climb. Because managers, or let's not blame managers, but an organization tends to have the belief that this should already have been working. And if it already should have been working, you might not actually see the need to fix it, right? And from another perspective, you are indirectly limiting sales from selling anything they want. So they may have complaints that you're suddenly like limiting their product portfolio by actually defining what should be sold in a specific case. But as a company as a whole, you should expect higher margins because you get less order errors and you get less issues with deliveries. So this is really one of those margin boosting activities in an organization. Magnus, this is the whole presentation that we've done. And if you only remember 3 things from this webinar, what should you try to remember and bring into your organization?
Okay, I would say the first thing is not to over-automate. And that's considering these domino effects, take it bit by bit, piece by piece. And then second thing, focus on quality. You can always save time later. And then third thing, play the telephone game when you're at a children's party. Don't do it at work. Did I miss anything important?
Yeah, I really like this human readable format in between. I think that's kind of an essential thing, that you don't want to let like integration code get in the way of your understanding. So always build your integrations in a way that a business person can look at the intermediate formats and the steps happening in between. So you as a human can see, okay, what happened, what went wrong, or what actually didn't go wrong. So essentially, call us if you're the one with the problem that no one else in your organization understands.
It's okay to call us even if there are other people in the organization that also understand. So, yeah.
That's fine.
That's fine.
We're also pretty much exactly on time. I am really impressed. We were supposed to finish 15:35 and then have 10 minutes for a Q&A. So with that said, we have, okay, now it's 9 minutes left for a Q&A. So we're opening the floor for questions.
Yeah, I'm actually very happy because there are a lot of questions, and sorry if we didn't get to reply straight away. And thank you, Magnus and Patrik, for your great presentation. I mean, you guys show once again, I mean, you're both co-founder of cpq.se and you have extensive experience, Magnus, over 20 years, and you're an architect for the implementation of CPQ at one of the world's largest medical device manufacturer, and Patrik, over 15 years of CPQ expertise, and you were an architect for the Scania implementation at Tacton, among many other projects. So you guys show once again such a great expertise and knowledge you have. So we can maybe take a couple of questions, Patrik.
Yeah. So I mean, if you have any more questions, just keep adding them. We'll try to answer as many as possible during the webinar, and then when we run out of time, we'll try to get the unanswered questions afterwards somehow in some format. The first question we got here, Magnus, this is a tricky one. How long time does it take to run a project? I think you're going to love this question. It's easy to answer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There is no simple answer, but I think it very much depends on the format of the data that we're looking at, because sometimes this is more like formulas or constraints written in human language, which actually takes some effort to interpret. Whereas where we have clear XO tables saying this works with this and this works with that, then it's pretty straightforward and it can be done within a much shorter period. What would you add, Patrik?
Yeah, I come back to the same thing about my human readable thing. If you can understand and read the data and understand how it should be used, then the project becomes easier. The hard part isn't really the coding or anything like that. The hard part is the understanding.
Yeah, and I think one other factor, if you're going to talk about things that makes it take long time, is when you don't have a complete understanding of the syntax of the things that you're converting. So if there is no definition of how the old formulas can be formulated, then you really need to first reverse engineer the previous system before you can build a new system. And that, of course, is a little bit more time consuming. But if you get all the cards on the table and you understand the setup, then it's what we do in every project. The only thing is that we should do it with more like a robot this time.
Mm. Then we have a question here that I think was actually good coming in late here. If we could include some sort of table for all the three-letter abbreviations that we threw in your face in that slide. We can definitely. I'll ask when we send follow-ups. We can try to include a table of all the 3-letter abbreviations that an organization typically has, and that could be included into a CPQ system. I just gave you 12, but I can give you another 5 as an added bonus.
Yeah, we had a longer list, but we had to take some away because it was just too overwhelming.
Yeah. Then Magnus, there's another question here. Have you worked with SAP?
Yes, this medical company that you mentioned, Atakan, there is something called KMATs in SAP, which is information about other things being configured in the same solution. So maybe the tire needs to know something about the rim, and then that's a KMAT. And that's for that delivery was incorporated as part of, because the result is going back to SAP in that project. So we also need to keep track of these things so that the next configurator could work as it should. So I guess the answer is yes.
Yeah, the variant configurator you're talking about here.
Yeah, the variant configurator.
Yeah, so it's a kind of common example to integrate the CPQ with a variant configurator. It is one of the more time-consuming projects, so we want to be open about that. It's not the super easy project, but again, we should come back to the idea of what's important for sales, or what's important for sales, what's good enough for sales. So just because you have a full variant configurator and you use it doesn't mean you need exactly all information in Tacton.
Yes, and it's also about what can be pre-processed, what needs to happen during configuration, and what can be done after configuration. Because sometimes we solve problems just because no other system wants to solve the problem, and that might not be the best idea.
Yeah, we're kind of running out of time here, I think, Atakan, but I think we have time for one final question here.
Yes, I think one more question.
Yeah. So this is a complicated question, both from understanding, but is it CPQ that integrates with external systems, or is it the other way around, Magnus?
I'm answering all the questions here, Patrik.
Yeah, but you need to answer this one as well, because this is a tricky one.
Yeah, okay. I think it's an easy answer because it goes both ways, of course. Sometimes the CPQ system needs to talk to external system, and sometimes the external system needs to talk to CPQ. So it very much depends. Or would you say something different?
No, I think it's I think that's an answer. I don't think you can say an easy direction here.
Right.
So Atakan, I think we're running out of time, right?
Yes, so we have a couple minutes left, and so we will share the recording, this webinar recorded, and we will share it once it's ready for all attendees. And if you have any other questions, meanwhile, as Patrik and Magnus said, do not hesitate to call them or reach to us by email, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anything else, Patrik and Magnus, you want to add?
I just want to thank everybody for listening in.
Yes, and I think the easiest way to reach out is probably LinkedIn. Or, of course, cpq.se gives you a hint on the web address.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much again, everyone, for your time and attending, and have a great rest of your day.